everyone. We're looking at lesson 4-3 today, graphing linear equations. So we talked about y is equal to mx plus b last week, and this is the slope-intercept form. And today we're going to be given equations and we are going to graph them. So let's see how this works. A couple of things, details that we need to recognize with the equation is that, first of all, the slope is always the number that's being multiplied by x. And it could be positive, it could be negative, it could be a fraction, it could be just a whole number. And the y-intercept is a constant at the end of our equation. So this is always a constant. And the slope will be the number that's being multiplied by x. So it's multiplied by x. So those are two important things to recognize about the slope and the y-intercept. Another thing is, if our slope is positive, it's a fraction, let's say it's 2/3, for example, we can also recognize that that's the same thing as -2 over -3. And we talked about this before. The movement of 2/3 would be rise going up and run to the right, because it's positive and positive. But when it's negative and negative, that means it's going down if it's -2 on the numerator, and to the left if it's negative in the denominator. Similarly, if we have a slope that's negative, let's say negative 1/2, let's say, it means if you have a negative in front of our fraction, this means you could put the negative on the top in the numerator, or you can bring the negative in the denominator. We also talked about this last week as well, which also the movement will be for the negative would be going down in the numerator and to the right in the denominator when it's positive. And positive in the numerator means your movement is going upward, and negative in the denominator means going to the left. So we know that rise over run means if you're rising upward is positive, if you're rising down, which means dropping really, it's negative. And to the right, you're moving positive on the x and negative on the x if you're moving to the left. So this is important when you're graphing, because you want to know how you're going to move and how your slope is going to need to move and plot your points correctly. So that's related to slope. And we're going to talk about the y-intercept now and how the y-intercept behaves when we're graphing. When we're graphing, our y-intercept, I'm going to write the equation down again, y is equal to mx plus b. This plus sign is important. We know that it has a plus sign here in the equation, but sometimes if we're given a problem, like let's say y is equal to 2x minus 3, when we're given this equation, we need to change this minus to a plus. So we're going to do that by just add a line, change the sign right here, and now we'll recognize that, okay, our y-intercept is actually -3 in this case. And we saw this last week in some problems as well. We had to translate that. So our y-intercept becomes -3, which means that that's where our y our line crosses the y-axis, would be at -3. Okay. So those are little points that you need to be able to kind of think about when you're graphing. So let's look at our first graph here. Okay, our first graph has or our first equation rather, has a slope, and we said that slope is the number that's being multiplied by x, and our slope here is negative 1/3. Okay, negative 1/3 is our slope. And the next thing to consider is, what's your y-intercept? And in this case, we said, well, if there's a minus sign, we're going to change it to a plus, negative. So our y-intercept is now clearly -2. So the slope here for this problem is going to be negative, and we can write that negative on the top, 1/3. Or let's write it in both ways as 1/-3. Remember, the negative can float, just like we learned right here. That negative, if it's in the front of our fraction bar, we just put it on the top or bottom, and we're doing that. So if you can write your fractions in two ways, that will be very helpful when you're graphing. And then the y-intercept here is -2. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and graph this. Now we know that the y-intercept is b. I'm going to give you a little helpful pointer. And that pointer is, it's like a little trick. We're going to move with m and begin with b. So you can kind of think about m, it's the first letter of move. Okay, so we're going to move with m, okay, and then begin with b. Okay, so begin with b. Let's begin with b. B is our y-intercept. That's where our line is going to cross the y-axis, and we're going to begin right here at -2. We'll plot our point right there. That's our beginning spot. Then we're going to move with m. That means from this beginning spot, this point of beginning, I'm going to go down 1 and to the right 3 and plot my other point. And remember, this is down 1 and to the right 3, because it's +3, right? And it's -1, right? And then this +1 is, I'm going up 1, and then -3 is to the left 3. So I can go from this beginning point and go up 1, and then move 1, 2, 3 to the left. So you can see now I have 3 points, and I can go ahead and draw my line. I'm going to take this line. Oops, that's not what I meant to take. This is my line. And I'm going to go ahead and draw it right through these 3 points. There you go. And now you've graphed this line. Now, or this equation. Now you see how many things I had to go through. I needed to identify where my slope and the y-intercept is in the equation. Then with that, start or begin with b, which is the -2 that I decoded from the equation. And then move with m by either going up to the left or down to the right. And you could double check yourself and say, okay, is my line going down? Because it needs to, because my slope is negative. And it is. So good job. You got that right. Let's look at the next question here. Okay, our next question is y is equal to, or next equation that we're going to graph rather, y is equal to -x plus 4. Okay, with this, you recall that we talked about a negative, we talked about this last week, right? Negative x is the same as -1 times x. So that's important to recognize. That means that this is -1 times x, right? And that means that the slope, if we know that the number that's multiplied by x is the slope, we can just rewrite this as y is equal to -1 x plus 4. The slope is -1. And there we go. So -1. And the y-intercept is the number at the end. You can always, it's a great idea to write your slope-intercept right on top, the equation right on top of your problem, so you can line things up accurately. And we could see very clearly here that the slope is -1, because that's a number that's multiplied by x, and the y-intercept here is 4, because that's the constant at the end after the plus sign. Great. So now we're going to go ahead and identify the slope and the y-intercept, and just kind of write it out for yourself. It's always a great idea to write things out so it's very clear. With slope, you want to always write your slope as a fraction. So even if it's an integer like this, just write it as rewrite it as a fraction. So -1 means -1 over 1, okay? Which also means 1 over -1. If you recall that we said you need to be able to do that. I'm going to go ahead and do something here, because write it down like this. So 1 over -1 is the same thing as -1, which is the same thing as our slope. Okay, great. So this is going to help me out. Now, let's go ahead and graph. So we have the y-intercept, which is our b, and that is 4. So we know that that's +4. That's where our line is going to cross the y-axis, +4. So I'm going to put a point right there. And then I'm going to go either up 1 and to the right. Oops, not to the right, to the left, right? Because this is a negative. Let me move this over a little bit. It's getting too squishy. So my y-intercept is 4. I graphed that already. Up 1, that's +1, and to the left 1, that's -1. And then we can go down 1 and to the right 1. That's what the movements are here with rise over run. So for the first one, remember, we're going to begin with B, which we did, and we're going to move with M. So we're going to go up 1 and to the left 1. There we go. Or we begin with B and go down 1 and to the right 1. And there you go. So we know that the slope is negative, so my line has to be going downward, which it is, which is great. And it's going to go through the y-axis at 4, which it does. And my slope is -1, which means going down 1 to the right 1 or up 1 to the left 1. And there you have it. So lots of different things happening here, but that's how we graph a line. And we have to go through all those, that process of thinking through, what is the slope? How can I write the slope as a fraction? Maybe a different fraction, so that I can have multiple points in both directions that I graph. And where do I begin? And how do I decode that from the equation? So lots of things to think about. Let's look at problem number 3. Problem number 3 is y is equal to -2 over 5x plus 5. I'll let you guys go ahead and graph this yourself. Begin with B and move with M. Notice that your slope here is negative as well. And go ahead and graph it. I'll give you some time to figure out what those are and graph this equation. Okay, so this problem here, we recognize that the slope is negative 2 over 5, so I wrote it as negative 2 over 5 or 2 over negative 5. And of course, the arrows are showing my movements, and the y-intercept is 5, so that's where I begin. And I started at 5, I put the point right there, I plotted it, and then I went down 2, so here we go, we went down 2, 1, 2, right? And then 5 to the right, and I plot the next point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a rise over run, and plotted the next point. And right here. Well, then I wanted to go ahead and do positive 2 over negative 5. I would have had to start here, gone up, but my graph didn't allow me to do that. I didn't have enough graph. So you guys might be able to do that, which was great, but mine didn't. But that's okay. If you have just 2 points, you're good to go. You don't need necessarily 3 points. But in this case, you could see why it's important to have both options in case you don't have the option of going the other way. You can always use your second option. So in this case, I only had one option, and I did that, and I graphed my line. Okay, so hopefully that made sense, and you're understanding why we want to have 2 different fractions for slope. Okay, let's go to the next problem here. Problem number 4. Y is equal to negative 3x minus 1. There's a minus 1 there, so it's a little tricky. Go ahead and graph that yourselves. Let's see how you do. Okay, so for problem number 3, I went ahead and I added the equation and I highlighted the slope and the y-intercept just to make sure that you guys have that. It's important to recognize those things right now since it's the beginning stages of you graphing these equations. So make sure you put that in your notes, please, right here. Y is equal to mx plus b, and lined it up with your y-intercept and slope. I did the same thing here. So the first thing that I did here is change that minus to a plus, and so identifying the slope-intercept as negative 1, and then the slope here, or not the slope-intercept, the y-intercept is negative 1, sorry, and the slope here is negative 3, which means negative 3 over 1, and that's the same thing as 3 over negative 1. So whenever you have an integer like this, just turn it into a fraction, and that's a good idea. It's like how we did with the negative 1 before. So I'm going to go down 3 and to the right 1, or up 3 and to the next, oops, what happened there? Sorry. Or up 3 and to the left 1. Okay? And those are my movements right there. Okay, so here we go. Begin with B. So I'm beginning with B, that's negative 1 right here, the y-intercept. So where my line is going to cross the y-axis is at negative 1 right there. And I'm going to move with M. So I have negative 3 over 1. So I can go down 3 and to the right 1 and plot my other point. Or I can go up 3 and to the left 1. So I'm going to start at my beginning point, which is negative 1. I can go up 3, 1, 2, 3, and to the left 1. And I can actually continue that 1, 2, 3 to the left 1. I have enough room in my graph, as you can see. This time we had enough room. And I'm going to go ahead and take my line and just connect the dots or the points, and there I have it. So I've graphed this equation. Oh, very good. Okay, here's problem number 5. This one looks a little different than the other ones that we did, and you don't seem to see a y-intercept. So when that's the case, we know that that resembles our proportional relationships where the line crosses the y-axis, like crosses the origin. But when you have a problem like this, you can always tell yourself, y is equal to mx plus b. If there is no b here, so there's no plus b, you can write plus 0 to just tell yourself, hey, like b is equal to 0. That's where my line is going to cross the y-axis at 0, so I can begin here. And then I can go ahead and move with the slope, which is, well, I'll let you figure out what that is and graph number 5 on your own. Go ahead and do that. We'll be back. Okay, so the slope is 1/4, or you could write -1 over -4. Remember, 2 negatives is also the same as a positive. So you could go up and to the right or down and to the left with your movement. So let's begin at B, which is the y-intercept, which is right here at that point. B is right here at the origin at 0. And then we're going to go up 1 and to the right 4. So 1, rise, over run. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's our next point. We can also go from the beginning point and go down, rise, dropping 1, that's -1, and to the left 1, 2, 3, 4, and that shows that the arrows are right there. And go ahead and draw your line. And there you have it. That is the graph of that equation. Okay. And last one that we're going to do is y is equal to x minus 3. Go ahead and identify the slope and the y-intercept and graph this last equation. Okay, this last problem, we see that the x is by itself. That means it's 1x. Remember, we talked about this before. If you have x by itself, that's the same thing as 1 times x, right? So that means that our slope is 1. And the y-intercept is actually -3 here, because we're going to change this minus to a plus and change the sign of the number to negative. So the sign of the number is always to the left of the number, but in this case we're just going to go ahead and kind of decode it using our y is equal to mx plus b. And we want to make sure that this here is y is equal to m times x plus b, and it's helpful to have everything line up with plus and m and all that. So m is equal to 1. That means 1 over 1, because we want to change that to rise over run, which is a fraction, and that is also the same thing as -1 over -1, which is rise over run again. So we can see our movement arrows that I drew here, and the y-intercept is at -3, which is where we begin. So we're going to begin at -3. It's right here. We're going to plot the point there, and we're going to go up 1 to the right 1, plot another point. Up 1 to the right 1, plot another point. Or we can begin at -3 again and go down 1 to the left 1. Down 1 to the left 1, as you can see with the points of the arrows here. And we go ahead and draw our line right through all these points, and there you have it. That's the line that matches this equation. So you've graphed y is equal to x minus 3.